Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's program, which is part of the New York Jewish Film Festival, presented by the Jewish Museum and Film at Lincoln Center. I'm Aviva Weintraub from the Jewish Museum, and it's a thrill to introduce this discussion of the film Winter Journey, which is currently showing on the festival's virtual platform until Sunday at noon, virtual.filmlink.org. We have with us as very special guests the film's director, Anders Østergaard, and Martin Goldsmith, who wrote the book, The Inextinguishable Symphony, that the film is based on, and whose voice stars along with Bruno Ganz in the film. In a moment, I'll turn this over to my colleague, Lisa Collins, a member of the New York Jewish Film Festival selection team this year. Our session today will start with a conversation between Lisa, Anders, and Martin, and after about 30 minutes, we'll start to take audience questions. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box. But first, I want to thank all of our funders, supporters, members, and people tuning in to this discussion. The film Winter Journey is a Danish-German co-production, and the festival thanks the Consulate General of Denmark in New York, the Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany in New York. And thanks also go to the US distributor of Winter Journey, Menemsha Films. And now, here's Lisa Collins.
Hi there, Viva. Thank you, Viva, so much. And welcome, Martin and Anders. And I just would love to say what a fantastic job you did collaborating on this film that really is so complex in terms of interweaving art and this discussion of art within Nazi Germany and propaganda and all of these different things that you sort of put together that make the viewer look at this in a very different way. What I wanted to basically say is that when I first watched the film, I wasn't able to I didn't recognize Bruno Ganz as an actor. I hadn't seen him in something for the longest of times. So as a credit to you both in this collaboration, I actually watched it for the most part, thinking of it as a documentary and without fiction. And I just wanted to say it's a testament to the seamless filmmaking that you did. And maybe just ask you each to speak about the film, you know, in your own words, but also how important the documentary tradition is to you and in conveying this film that sort of is such a sublime merge. I just, you know, hats off to you both for that, and to your co-director, Anders Erzsébet.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're very welcome. Yeah, so what can you share a little bit with the audience about what the film is before we sort of get into the discussion?
Well, from my perspective, it's a marvelous treatment of the book that I wrote, The Inextinguishable Symphony, a story of my parents and their experiences performing with an all-Jewish orchestra in Nazi Germany. This was an orchestra made up of Jews who had been kicked out of their positions with German opera houses, orchestras, and theater companies, and they came together to form their own organization, to perform with the Kulturbund, to be a violinist or a conductor or a dancer or to build sets or to take tickets to the box office. To do any of those things, you had to be Jewish. Only Jews were allowed to attend these performances. So it was very much a restricted organization, but it was encouraged by Dr. Joseph Goebbels and his Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, as it was called, as they were able to point to the Kulturbund, as the organization was called, and say, in effect, well, you hear these stories of us treating the Jews badly. Look, they have their own orchestra, they have their own opera company. So all of these things you're hearing are, well, I guess the German equivalent of fake news. Pay no attention to it. We were treating them just fine. But Anders works in this very interesting mode that I guess in the literary world is called narrative nonfiction. So while he is telling a true story, a documentary story, he has actors portraying some of the key characters in the story. And yes, he cast the magnificent Swiss-born actor Bruno Ganz to play my father. And you're saying, Lisa, that it took you a while to realize that he was acting. It's still, every time I see the film, I'm stunned by how incredibly he really just inhabited my father's skin and spoke and moved and did so many things that were reminiscent of my father, even though he had obviously no way of knowing him.
Fantastic. Yeah, stunning is a pretty great word to describe it. I really had no thought that this was fiction unfolding, even though it's, you know, obviously based in reality. So again, it's a great, great job working in that way. Maybe can you speak about working with Bruno Ganz in this, what would end up being his final role? And maybe, I don't know, there's so much to discuss about how he played this with full empathy and rage and reticence. Perhaps you can just speak about your process of working with him, from introducing the text to being on set. Yeah, and how long you both filmed together, or you and your team filmed together.
Right. We spent 10 days in Arizona, so it was a very compressed, considering how many film minutes came out of it, it was a very compressed production period, which demanded the absolute, most of all, professionalism of Bruno to be able to deliver this kind of monologue that actually is, in many ways, yes, it's a dialogue, but it drives every scene. So there was a gigantic task for him to get through those 10 days and make it coherent, making it as well as he did. So I remember his professionalism above all, as how well prepared he was, how deep he had thought about what he was going to do on set, and his amazing intuition, of course, because as Martin can confirm, he rather avoided research talks with Martin or any other member of the family, anybody who would have known George Goldsmith. I think it felt for him as a distraction and intimidation, actually. He would have felt shy about interpreting this character in the presence or even in having been in contact with the family. He much preferred to intuitively approach the man. And that was fair enough because he did such a good job with that. But it's interesting that he asked very few questions. He read the dialogue, he read the text, he learned it by heart. He did not take a comma, but otherwise he worked out of pure intuition. There's nothing improvised about this film in that sense, by the way.
See, it's almost that you have to announce it because it feels so fresh in every moment, you know, that it feels as if it were.
And
no, he was not one for improvisation. He was a theater man. He came from theater. He treated even my humble work, our humble work, as if it was Shakespeare, with the greatest respect, which I'm still grateful to him for.
It was really eerie at times. Again, the script, much of the conversations between my father and me, much of that script is based on actual conversations that I had with my father as I sought to learn more about my family. And there are many moments throughout the film, but one that I keep coming back to is the scene in which he tells me about his landlord, a fellow by the name of Adolf Kohn, who kept a suitcase by the door. And my father asked him, why do you do that? And Adolf Kohn said, well, I'm going to have a few things with me when the Gestapo comes to take me away. My father says, what are you talking about? And Adolf Kohn says, haven't you heard? We're all going to be burned. And my father said, oh, come on, these are fairy tales, rumors. You don't pay any attention to them. And Adolf Kohn looked at him and said, "You will remember Adolf Kohn." So that part of the script was taken down verbatim from what I recall my father saying to me. And it is almost spooky the way Bruno delivers that story and those lines. He spoke almost exactly as I remember my father speaking to me. And there's, again, no possible way he could have known. And yet he just intuited it through his genius.
Yeah. And another thing that I love that he says often at really pivotal points as a character, you know, the text that's written for him, but he delivers this line, "What do you mean?" I'm restating it, but it's something, that I think is just one of those things where people have to pivot when they can't take it anymore. They can't take any more of the emotion or any more of the pain, and they pivot. I wanted to know, Martin, is that something that you found your father would, in the middle of sort of telling his story, you'd push too far, and that would be the...
Oh yes, yeah. He was a master at deflection, and there are many things that he spoke of that he remembered extremely well. Sometimes he remembered better than I really wanted him to, and it's in the scene where he talks about on New Year's Eve, 1937, he and the woman who would become my mother went off to celebrate New Year's Eve at a small inn in the Taunus Mountains near Frankfurt. And he tells me in the film, as he did in life, "That's the first time your mother and I made love." And I said, "Okay, TMI, too much information."
Right.
So there were moments when he would remember things crystal clear, but there were times when I would ask about more uncomfortable subjects, and he would very brusquely say, "I don't remember, and let's go out and take a walk."
Yes. Pardon me. The visuals and the landscape and the weather, it's also captivating on film, and sort of metaphorically speaks to the things that are going on with the characters. And I wanted to speak to you about what the desert terrain meant to each of you in terms of this story. I know it's where, I understand it's where he lived, but how did it sort of further push the story into where you wanted to talk, or things you wanted to articulate?
Well, first of all, it triggers a key line for the whole piece, which also is related to the title, when he quotes Schubert, the song, the old German song that is it belongs to the cycle called Winter Journey, and gives the film its title. He sings this phrase, or half sings these phrases, half. Wie ist das jetzt mal? Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd kehre ich wieder aus, which means I came as a stranger I depart. So this notion of being a stranger in a strange land is, of course, this is something that the desert can really enhance, and it's a key motif that this good man from Germany who grew up with lush parks in the northern Germany and the sea and the cows in the field and all that, and now is displaced in a desert, speaks volumes about his situation. And also a bit about, I think it develops into a metaphor for his voluntary amnesia, if you like, of his not remembering, as his being on the other side of the moon, so to speak, where you don't have to remember.
Yes.
Yeah, my father never felt at home in the desert. My mother was a sun lover, and so they moved to Tucson in 1981, and 3 years later, my mom died. Yeah. And my father stayed there for another 20 years, even though he, as Honor said, he felt himself a stranger in a strange land. And though Honors and his team captured the beauty of the desert just magnificently, it was always a foreign landscape to my father. As he says in the very first scene, I could do with a change of seasons, some green grass and trees. he always felt, again, as Honor said, a stranger in a strange land. It has very much to do with the penance that I think he felt he needed to pay as a result of his family being murdered in the Holocaust and his having survived.
Yes. I was going to go into that. So funny you mentioned that. I was going to go into that sort of the weight of survivor's guilt, and how this story takes it on in such a complicated way, in that the very thing that his father didn't quite approve of, the very thing that your father's father did not approve of, which was your father's violin playing, is the very thing that allowed him to be transported into surviving and into having a life. I wonder if you feel like that, perhaps, Martin, whether or not that exacerbated his feelings of guilt, that he was this musician, and was supposed to be something else, with a father who was in the army and all this stuff, and that this transported him to safety.
Well, it is literally true that being in the Kulturbund saved my parents' lives. On Kristallnacht, the Nazi pogrom of November 9th, 1938, when synagogues were burned and Jewish businesses had their windows broken, thus giving the name of the Night of Broken Glass. The Kulturbund actually had a moment, because of the horrible press that Germany got around the world. The Kulturbund actually had a moment when they had a little bit of power, and they were able to negotiate several of their people who had been sent to concentration camps to be released. But then they went back to work, and they were protected by the Nazis because, as I say, Joseph Goebbels saw the organization as a propaganda tool. So yes, being a musician, being in the Kulturbund saved my parents' lives, and they made it to this country rather late in June of 1941. But my father felt that he was unable to save his family. And so, yes, he was, I think, beset with guilt the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Under those,
Lisa, I'm I think
yes.
actually it's well observed of you to notice the little tension in this childhood sequence, where he talks about my father wanted to be a real man, but I guess he gave up on that quite soon. So there is a slight tension. I think of course, Martin would know better than me about family dynamics, but I always had the impression that was actually an undercurrent, a certain tension between the businessman and the musician, then ending up in a very sad place, but that there is a tension from the beginning between these two gentlemen.
And my father remembers that he had a chicken run on the side of the house. He raised chickens, and one day he came home from school and there was this enormous egg in the chicken run, and he picked up the egg and ran to his parents saying, "Oh, look at this enormous egg one of my chickens laid." Yeah. And it in fact was a goose egg that my father's father had left as a joke, and my father did not find it funny in the least.
Yeah. It's a very the whole the interweaving in of this arts saving, saving lives is a really sort of quite a powerful thread in this story. And I wonder, there's so much to talk about. I can barely begin, but about releasing this story now during these times, whether or not we can speak about America or globally, but, how much more relevant do you feel like this movie moved from the time when you filmed it to the time of releasing it, just in terms of thoughts on either of your thoughts on propaganda or massacres or all of these different things? And again, and I also want to speak about how wonderfully they're painful, but how wonderfully you animated and revealed these archival images that are so disturbing to look at, but are important to feel in terms of what was going on with this pillaging and everything. So let me pass that back over to you both.
Why don't you talk about the wonderful images that you produced with the still photographs?
Yes, let me talk a bit about that, how that came about. Basically, out of the frustrations that many of the key locations were gone, for obvious reasons, since Berlin was flattened during the war, in particular in the districts where our stories taking part. For instance, the theater building of the Kulturbund, or even the Gestapo headquarters, which play also a pivotal role in the story as George has to leave the country. And simply because I was getting tired of trying to find locations that would fit somehow, and trying to make this kind of plastic ersatz for the real thing. I thought, why don't we work with the locations as they are in what remains, namely photos, the photo documentation, and we put our actors there. I also felt we could achieve something else by this technique, and that was to suggest a certain alienation and or a certain psychological condition as he walks as so to speak, the last living man on earth.
It is exactly how that feels.
Reminds me of a New York song, a Simon and Garfunkel song. How is it, Martin? The only living boy in New York. The only living boy in New York. As he walks around and feels like everybody are frozen in this totalitarian crazy.
It's also like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yes,
right.
yes.
And he's the only living soul left. So that's how it must have felt, to walk about in those bizarre years where you didn't know what was going to happen to as a Jewish person in Germany. So I felt there was that to be achieved as well, as a psychological expression of that in the pictures.
And as to the film's relevance, it has long been observed that whenever you make references to Adolf Hitler, that sort of shuts the discussion down. And so making direct comparisons is foolish. I just want to observe that Hitler's stormtroopers were originally local men, largely men, some of them unemployed, some of them not, who just roamed around burning and beating people up. And to the degree that this country has experienced any of that of late, it's perhaps just a warning note from 80 years in the past.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I found what the film does is a warning note is a really great way of saying it, because actually there's a point in the film where you are addressing your father and saying, well, you must have known what was coming. And while I think it's profound because it's such a human thing that only in hindsight do we ever really, really fully discover what was coming. We know what happened and can sort of prepare for it the next time. Do you feel that, that you, maybe Martin, you were assuming too much or wanting your father to know too much at his young age, maybe put you on the spot there,
Well, yes, I foolishly thought that my hindsight transformed into his foresight 80 years ago. But of course, he had no idea what was coming. But I, being young and foolish and impatient with him and dealing with my own father-son issues, as my father did with his father, yes, I in that part of the script, I say, you surely couldn't have been playing Mozart all the time with your heads buried in the sand. I mean, come on. But yes, that was ahistorical of me.
Yes, yeah. But still a great thing for all of us to, remember as we watch it. There's a scene in the film where you are speaking where the Martin Martin's voice. Oh, it's hard. I'm seeing you and thinking of you being only audio. But you're speaking with Bruno in character as your father, and you're hearing him, but he's not actually moving his lips. So you're speaking sort of, it's out of sync. And Anders, I thought that there was really excellent sound work there that you did in different ways of getting into Martin's father's head, as well as us starting to understand and hear Martin through his breaths and all this stuff. Like a hide and seek goes on between who you're showing and who you're hearing. Can you talk about perhaps plotting that out or planning that? And was that the original intention? Is it something that grew out of your working on the film, you and Erzsébet?
I used to talking about a moment where he kind of overdubs his own image, so that you don't see him talking, but you hear
while the Nielsen Symphony is playing.
Yes.
I don't remember there's more than that exact moment where I use that effect, but you're right. It's obviously about going into his own mind. It's a kind of, it's in, I would say, in the classical film handbook of editorial editing effects that can bring you a step deeper into the mind of the person you see. So that was probably it was not a considered strategy from the beginning. It's one of those things that pop up in editing that worked well and made sense. So we put it in. It could have been the editor's choice and me not at all being involved in it. I'm just seeing it and saying, oh, that's cool. There's so many decisions to be made. And you can be sure that 20% of them are completely coincidental. But of course, it's about, what I can say about it is that it was, I remember shooting that with Bruno where he was simply just listening to a record. And I felt that was the strongest material of the whole film. You're not saying a word, just sitting there, listening to the music and going back in his memories and going back in time. And you see so much going on in those eyes. So I know that I was keen to squeeze that to the max of what I could use of that particular shoot.
His eyes are among his
that's just amazing.
Potent parts of his being an actor. Another highlight for me is when I talked to him about what happened after Kristallnacht and that his father was arrested and taken to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And of course, you filmed it at dusk and you see the lights of Tucson behind him. And you see his eyes filling with tears as he says, I was always very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that is amazing.
It's an amazing moment. Yeah, filled. I mean, I feel like moment after moment, there every 10-15 minutes, there's a moment of like sublime irony that really tugs at your heart, but you have to keep moving with the film, and that's really something special. And I guess also part of the thought of the inextinguishable symphony, that no matter what, the music goes on.
As Carl Nielsen said, music is life, and like life, inextinguishable.
Yes. I am. Well, I think there's just there's so much that I guess I'm wondering what happens, or what are other plans with this film at this point. I feel like there's it's so important that it's seen, or I should hope that it's seen by many people. I think that it's a really very special film. And so I'm just wondering if there, in addition to being on our slate, which we are very proud of, I'm wondering what else might be in store for this film.
Well, at the moment, it's going to be shown as part of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival and the Miami Jewish Film Festival and the festival in Toronto in the spring. I think there are other irons in the fire, but I don't know enough about them to tell you anything about it. But if you know anybody at Netflix or Amazon or HBO, we should talk.
Yeah. On the European side, I can add we were actually just getting started on a quite promising German distribution opening in 50 cinemas, I think, 40 cinemas across the country. Just days before they made the major lockdown, and then the cinemas had to close. And now we're just very curious to see whether it can have a comeback sometime in the spring when they hopefully open again, or whether there has been such a pile up of new titles that they will drown in the, you know, in the jungle. But we're hopeful that it will be relaunched for the spring. Because it really worked for the Germans. I think I can honestly say, this film. There's also an interesting aspect of it.
Yes, yes. Well, Anders, can you tell us a little bit about your collaborator as well, or co-director? How
Erzsébet.
you both work together?
Yeah, so Erzsébet is my general partner in crime. We made several films together. She's a scriptwriter by profession. Here she has a kind of all-round job. She is, I think her main achievement creatively is the very, very gifted archive research and very stubborn archive research that she's able to perform, finding the most incredible pieces and knowing what I want. That's simply understanding, because creative archive research is not one-to-one. You cannot exactly define what you need. It's sometimes extremely vague, and just all about finding a needle in a haystack. And she tends to manage, and that's a great aspect of these archive-based styles that I often make use of. And co-writer in the sense is critical reader, and sometimes tosses in a line or two in the script. And she came up with the title, by the way. Why don't you simply call this film The Winter Journey, which came very late.
Oh, perfect.
That was not obvious to me until we have actually been sitting making one winter scene after the other at the end of the film, as you may remember, snow in the desert and all that.
Yes.
And we realized we were doing winter motifs all the time. So it was obvious to put two and two together and call the film exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah. It aptly describes the journey that
Somehow
we all take. We all take. By the way, do I have either of you met anyone who had any relatives who survived and or remembered seeing the orchestra?
Oh yes, when I was doing research for the book, I took out an ad in the foreword, the Jewish foreword, and asking for people who had been Kulturbund members. And I met about half a dozen people who had either acted with the Kulturbund or had danced with the Kulturbund. I met an electrician who ran lights for the Kulturbund Theater. And I met the man who played the oboe in the orchestra and literally sat right next to my father in the Kulturbund Orchestra. So yes, I had a chance to speak with a number of people.
And was it a place of mixed feelings for them? That's so interesting.
It was.
The person that sat next to your father.
It was mixed feelings, because at the time it was a refuge both for the artists and for the audience members. But in retrospect, it's possible to see the Kulturbund for what it was, which was a propaganda outlet. And in the book, The Inextinguishable Symphony, I quote one of the performers who said the whole thing was a lie from beginning to end. We were figures on the Nazi chessboard, and he felt used. And in fact, there are those who say that had there been no Kulturbund, more Jewish artists might have seen the light earlier and emigrated, and because they stayed in the orchestra, they were murdered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so ironic, that Jewish culture as a commodity is being used, but as a people is being exterminated. It's just quite crazy.
One of the ironies of the Kulturbund, which Anders, I think, brings out, is the fact that so many of the members of the Kulturbund were devotees of German culture. They wanted to play Beethoven and Brahms and Schumann and Bach, but they couldn't. The Gestapo ruled that for a Jewish artist to play Beethoven or for a Jewish actor to speak the words of Goethe or Schiller was to defile this great German art. And so they were told, be Jewish. It's the Jewish Kulturbund. Play Mendelssohn, play Gustav Mahler, play other Jewish composers, and put on plays from the shtetls, which was totally foreign to 90% of the Kulturbund musicians and actors. And there's that scene in the film where Honor sort of brings that up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that must have further complicated your own father's complicated connection to his heritage. Did you find him sort of navigating trickily through that in your youth? I mean, I know it clearly comes up in the story, but
well, he didn't have to do any navigating. He stayed in one port, which was Adolf Hitler called me a Jew. I choose not to be Jewish. I mean, as I say at one point in the film, your grandfather's name was Moses. Your great grandfather's name was Levi Goldschmidt. You're as Jewish as gefilte fish. And my father wanted nothing of it. He said, I choose not to be a Jew. So I was not bar mitzvahed when I was 13. I waited until I was 55 to be bar mitzvahed. So.
Wow. Had you found that your father had his bar mitzvah by then?
Well, yes, I had discovered that in the research of doing the book. And of course, he denies remembering his bar mitzvah, which is beyond the stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the thought-provoking mindset he has in these days of where we're so keen on identity and heritage and all that, where we come from and where we belong, he was a man who was completely devoted to his role as a citizen in the German Republic, mind you, before the Nazis. We talk about the Weimar Republic, which was very much defined by the best of German culture. It didn't survive, sadly, but it has ideals of enlightenment, freedom, and justice, and spiritual growth, cultural growth, and all that. And I think it was very convincing for him to see that as his identity, that society, that community, that society, rather as his tribal heritage, as who would probably think of Judaism as. So it's a provocative mindset he has for our time, but not entirely irrelevant in my opinion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I suppose I should also ask about your mother as well. I don't want to leave her out of the discussion. Did she speak a bit about the orchestra, and was she also navigating her own?
Well, alas, she died in 1984, which was a good 5 years or so before I began asking the questions. Again, my brother and I both knew that we didn't have grandparents to visit. We didn't go over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house on Thanksgiving. And my brother once asked my father, where are aunts and uncles and grandparents? And his brief reply was, they died in the war. And so I didn't really begin to ask questions until after my mother died. But she did speak of the orchestra once or twice, that it was a very, very fine organization. I mean, the conductor of the Frankfurt Kulturbund Orchestra was a man by the name of Hans Wilhelm Steinberg. He later emigrated to this country, and under the name William Steinberg was the music director of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Pittsburgh Symphony, the Buffalo Philharmonic. So he was very well known here in the States, but he got his start conducting the Kulturbund Orchestra in Frankfurt.
Okay. That's very interesting, yes.
We do have some questions from the audience. A couple of questions about the archival material. For example, is any of it actually film or photos of the Goldsmith family? And also, were there any home movies that maybe we don't see that the film took its basis from?
No, it's not original. These are not authentic footage from the Goldsmith family. I cannot recall any. I don't.
There is one exception. the photograph of my mother's father's house when
yes,
when
that's true.
when
Yeah,
were pleased to Düsseldorf.
That's correct. Yeah.
On the day after Kristallnacht, we see him walking towards this house, which was in fact my mother's house.
Yes, that's true. But otherwise, I take the liberty of using generic, so I would call it generic material from similar families of the same lifestyle at the same time, and giving priority to telling the story, to purveying the moods of these households, and then worry less about the, if you like, authenticity. For me, it's the critical thing is that you catch the mood. And the atmosphere of these places, and I mind less if it's then taken from another or similar family.
Although there's also actual photographs, and in fact a moving picture of Kurt Singer, the director of the Kulturbild.
Oh yeah, of course. When we get to public figures, it's easier to find, obviously, documentation. We have a bit of that, but if you're talking about private people, otherwise didn't have any life in public. In the 20s, very few of them would have cameras and would, shoot films of themselves. It was still a rarity. It was not a common thing.
And were there any home movies, Martin, of you interviewing your father, or?
No, there were not.
And a related question for Anders: at what point did you settle on the form? And at what point did you settle on the way you used archival material, which I think is something you've been interested in other work as well?
Yeah, well, it comes natural to me. I talked before how I was kind of frustrated not to be able to use the real locations. So then actually using the real location by going to photographs and putting my actors into the photos, if you like. This is the philosophy of the whole thing. So it comes at some point in research where you feel like, now, if I go and look for things that are a bit like Berlin as it used to be in some other city, it's going to fall apart. You're not going to feel you are there. It's going to feel fake. And so I guess quite early in the research phase, I decided for this principle of combining archive with my own character, my own protagonists. I could not know then how much I would need critical mass, and we didn't need to find enough archive material in order to tell my story. I wasn't sure of that at all until late into the process.
But it results in, for me, again, one of the very memorable moments of the film, when you see my father as a young man walk up the stairs of Gestapo headquarters, when in fact, he's walking up a rickety flight of 2x4s hammered together by Anders' crew, and they're holding onto it so the thing doesn't collapse. But because of green screen, we are led to believe that is my father walking up actual Gestapo headquarters. I think it's a chilling and very memorable moment in the film.
Sure.
It's really some of the finest use of green screen that I've seen. I mean, it's like we were saying earlier, it's possible to believe in the actuality of the footage. Another question is, curious to hear whether Bruno Ganz said anything about how he felt about or why he was interested in taking on the role of Martin's father and a Holocaust-related story.
He was not the kind of guy to talk much about his work. He would just do it. I understood that he had a very long, as a long time interest in the Jewish aspect of Europe. The Jews are all gone, and what happened to them, and how was it like, and all that. He was reading a lot about that subject. So that would be. I conclude from that's one of the reasons why he took on this script. But that's speculation, because he hesitated to comment himself much about what he does. He said, "Das ist gut, das machen wir." That means that's good. Let's make it. That was about the level of reflection I was involved in.
I find it sort of wonderfully ironic that for so many filmgoers, I mean, he's known for Wings of Desire by the Vendors, and he's known as Adolf Hitler in the film Downfall. And his scenes in the bunker has, as I'm sure you know, been the basis for all these YouTube adaptations. So, I mean, he's best known probably in this country for playing Adolf Hitler, and the fact that his final role is of this Holocaust survivor, I think is...
Well, I dare to say he was mindful of that, actually, that there was some kind of, it had some relationship to that big part of being known for being Hitler. I think it triggered him into trying to explore a major Jewish role, as a matter of fact. I got that impression from some of our early talks.
Oh, that's very interesting. I will say a couple of years ago, we showed a lovely film called The Tobacconist by Nikolaus Leitner, where Bruno Ganz played Sigmund Freud. So,
I think technically that was his second to last film that he completed.
Yeah, 2018. Martin, I'm curious if people want to read your book, can it still be found?
Oh, yes. If you'll permit me. Looks like this. Yes, you can buy it online, many of the usual places.
Great.
I would be honored if you would.
Great. And Anders, can you, I know it's hard during the pandemic to talk about future work, but is there anything you can tell us that you're thinking of working on coming down the road?
Well, I'm always thinking a lot of things. I just need other people to agree with this thinking before the movie is there. And until that point has been reached, I hesitate to say anything in public about it because I have I cannot know. Well, you're absolutely right. It's not the easiest time at the moment to plan or produce films. We just have to stick this out, and so we can come together again and exchange ideas in a more meaningful way. I can't say more about that.
Yes. Amen.
At this moment.
Yeah. Well, we have a question for Martin about, can you talk about your father's guilt? How did it drive his American occupation?
Well, as I indicated earlier, well, when they came to this country, they first took menial jobs. My mother was a domestic, cleaning other people's houses. My father had this very interesting job reconditioning old zippers and making them good for use in new trousers. But then after about a year, they both got jobs as musicians. My father played with Baltimore Symphony. My mom played in the Pittsburgh Symphony with Fritz Reiner. They both played for a season in the New Orleans Philharmonic. And then in 1946, just as these grisly newsreels began to be released from Europe, my mother auditioned for and was accepted by the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. And my father chose not to audition. And he spent the rest of his professional life selling furniture at a department store, a famous bar department store in St. Louis, mentioned by Amanda Wingfield in The Glass Menagerie, parenthetically. And he never picked up his flute again. And I'm convinced that it was an act of penance. And he, in a sort of sideways sort of way, agreed with me at one point.
It's curious. I'm not even sure we've discussed that, Martin, that the profession he chooses is quite close to what his father used to do as a salesman.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, obviously your grandfather was a great entrepreneur and has his own store, but still. There's a diva aspect to this that gives up being a musician in order to be a salesman, like his father. That's funny. We haven't actually never discussed.
It's funny. I never quite put those two things together as you.
Oh, neither have I. Neither have I. We still have things to explore. Yeah.
But I think it's telling that after my father and mother moved to Tucson, and they ran into new people, and of course the obvious question is, "Oh, what did you used to do before you retired?" My father always said, "I was a musician."
I was a musician. Yeah.
And a question has come in, Anders, what brought you to this particular story?
Well, obviously I was intrigued, first of all, by the Kulturbund phenomenon, this kind of devil's pact story about art and politics. Fascinated by this, the question which is put in the film is, how long can you stay in your bubble without relating to the real world outside? I'm a kind of guy who likes to stay in my bubble if I can. So I totally empathize with these musicians who say this is too good to live. Never mind what's going on outside the windows. This Tchaikovsky is great. So this is something I can empathize with. So it's always been something I ask myself also. How long can I stay in my bubble until I have to deal with the real world? So that was something that affected me on a personal level, and the generational aspect, father, son, trying to dig out the past, that goes actually beyond Jewish questions. This is something that's quite universal in families, to figure out what made people dysfunctional in the way they are. I think has broader perspectives. And music. I'm simply just very happy to come across projects where I can work with music and narrative, with a narrative function, where I don't choose music as a decoration to the story, or even as my comment to the story, but that it grows out of the story. So this meant, for instance, that I was, for the first time in my life, allowed to play these great masters such as Tchaikovsky or Beethoven, or all those things that would be too much for me to choose as a comment. But they are there because they are part of the story. These pieces are turning points in the story. And that was irresistible for me to work with.
And at what point in the filmmaking process was Martin's part filmed? Was it before, during, or after Bruno Ganz's part? And what was the experience like for Martin?
Martin can talk about how I felt like, but it was a quite complicated process actually, because as we explained earlier, Bruno had a certain shyness about being confronted with real family members. He's told me straight out, I cannot do that. Before I met anybody, I would not feel free to interpret my character. I will always be looking for whether I'm doing it correctly somehow. And I totally respected that, but that the obvious consequence was that he could not play directly against Martin. It wouldn't work for him. So Martin, somebody else, a very gifted actor here from Berlin, American, staying here, who's a resident here in Berlin, Harvey Friedman, stood in for Martin on set in Arizona. And then later on, Martin would dub this in a studio, dub these lines. And so that's how they meet in the end. And that took a lot of talent and effort from all of them to make that a convincing situation at the end.
And so Martin and Bruno Ganz didn't meet.
Well, I did meet. I met him briefly, and we had a wonderful dinner together. All the whole crew had a wonderful dinner with him. He regaled us with stories from his theater life in Berlin. But then, yes, I guess in September of 2018 or 2019, I flew to Copenhagen and spent 3 very intense days in the studio with Anders and his sound man. And there was Bruno on the screen, and I was acting with Bruno secondhand, so to speak. And yet, again, he is such a phenomenal actor that it took me about 10 seconds to forget that he wasn't quote real unquote. So that was a great thrill for me.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're about at time. Lisa, do you have one last question, or?
Oh, I think these were great. They added additional insight into that process. Yeah, because I was actually wondering as well about the timing of when each was speaking to the other. So that was all great. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I guess we just want to say how much we really adored this film, and think that it's quite accomplished and has a seemingly simple appearance, but simple in that very sort of clean and this one man talking to another off screen, but there's so much more to it. So I always think that when you can get that many layers out of something that's a really clean, simple, like a conceit, then you've done tremendous work. So that's what I'd just like to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for the film, and thank you so much for talking with us this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Yes.
for sharing the film with your
Yes.
New York audiences. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye
night.
now. Good night. Good night, everybody.